Sure. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Freshwater Future, for inviting me to this conference to give an overview of the state revolving fund and how those funds can be used to improve our water infrastructure and stormwater improvements in our communities, particularly communities that are under-resourced, environmental justice communities that are really challenged. So just to give you a little bit of background on who I am, I am the executive director for an organization in the city of North Charleston, South Carolina, called the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities, or LAMPC for short. And we work on several issues revolving around trying to revitalize communities, particularly communities that are under-resourced, overburdened, and they are, by the federal government definition, they are identified as environmental justice communities. And these are communities that not only face disproportionate impact from environmental contamination or environmental exposure risk, they also face issues around low educational attainment, economic disadvantages, housing, affordability issues, as well as environmental challenges, right? And when we define environmental justice, we see all those overlapping issues as environmental justice concerns. So we define it broadly in the same definition that EPA uses as they define environmental justice, but we add to that that definition and add that everything that impacts people's quality of life is considered environmental justice. So that is our approach to environmental justice. Next slide, please. So just to begin this conversation, I wanted to really ground us in, even before we start looking at what funding is out there to begin to address some of our community issues, if it's water issues or housing issues or other types of concerns in communities, we always have to ground ourselves in what it is that we're trying to address. So the first thing that we usually do when we work with organizations or with communities that are looking for funding to address a specific issue is to have this conversation around what their definition of community development. And how we define community development is that it encompasses everything involving neighborhood beautification, affordable housing, economic development, and revitalization of low wealth communities and neighborhoods. And we look at broadly at 4 elements to consider as you are moving through what type of funding to identify. That is the needs and desires of the neighborhood and the community, right? A lot of times when we are looking for projects to fund, particularly from the government level, when we're looking at municipalities or cities or counties or whatever it is, it's usually a top-down approach, right? And normally what that does in communities, it creates a lot of mistrust. It creates a lot of angst in communities, particularly communities that experience historical disinvestment in their neighborhoods. Then all of a sudden here, all these dollars are being, poured into communities, poured into states, and states are rushing this money out the door for projects, right? And in low wealth communities, these communities are starting to now feel really concerns around why investment now. Why are our communities getting these types of investment? If it's infrastructure improvements or if it's building of sidewalks, all those kind of things are combined with these types of funds. And the number one thing and concern that we hear from communities is that why are they doing this? And are they doing this to push us out of our neighborhoods, right? So when towns and cities and jurisdictions are looking at these types of funding sources to improve infrastructure, they need to we really suggest having a conversation with the community, right? And informing the community, educating the community on the needs and why these fundings are needed, so that there is this conversation that is being had in communities that allow communities to shape or to influence how the funds are being used in their community. So are they truly meeting the needs and the desires of the neighborhoods and communities that we're trying to invest these funds into? And the second thing is that the communities need to be at the table, right? Even during the conversation of how these funds are going to be used, how they are going to be implemented, the design, the communities need to be at the table and their voice is represented in the conversation. So it needs to be a community-led effort in this community. What that does, again, is suppress concerns around why are they investing in our communities now? And then focus on self-help processes, right? Improvements to infrastructure is going to improve the livability of an area, the quality of life of the community, right? So make it very personal to communities on why these projects are being pushed forward as an investment project. And then collectively work on a shared vision and goals, right? We know that these funds are not a cure-all for all the issues and concerns in communities, but it is a beginning process. And then there needs to be a conversation about what is next, right? When we invest these monies into communities for infrastructure improvement, what's next? Right, having conversations around housing, around educational attainment, around other types of issues and concerns in communities, not just the improvements of infrastructure in communities, but looking at community as a whole ecosystem and being able to address and use these types of funding to begin to address disinvestment that has happened in communities for generations. Next slide, please. So what is the State Revolving Fund? This is really a partnership between EPA and states. Every state, including Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. is not a state, but including Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, all of them have a state revolving fund. And what it is that annually the EPA makes these contributions to these state funds. And then there's a match on the state side where they have to match 20% of what is contributed to their state fund. So this is designed to be a revolving fund. So as the funds are released or awarded out to municipalities or eligible organizations. Some states allow even nonprofits or other types of groups to apply for these funding. So it looks different across different states. But these funds are deployed in various different types of manners. It could be a grant, it could be a bond, it could be a loan. And typically, if it's a loan, these are low interest rate loans. So these are revolving funds that recapture the money over time through a repayment system, also interest. And all that goes back into the revolving fund so that they can release more funds for other projects. There, again, the process to access the funds look different across states. I would highly suggest that you Google your state revolving fund and find out what that process is. In South Carolina, it's an application process. And you put in your application. That application sits for, I believe, a year while they are doing their review. And they prioritize which projects will get funding. And that's how South Carolina does it. But these are in South Carolina, only municipalities, counties, and special districts, right? Like water districts and those types of entities can apply for the South Carolina State Revolving Fund. But I know, for example, in Atlanta has been able to combine their state revolving fund with a green infrastructure bond. So they were able to create a green infrastructure bond to use along with their state revolving fund, which is a really creative way of leveraging state funds with some other types of funding that they were able to pull together. So the State Revolving Fund was created in 1987 with the amendment of the Clean Water Act. And in 2014, it was amended again, really reformed with the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. But basically, what was done was to create this mechanism to get monies into areas for infrastructure improvement. So this is really a powerful tool for improving not only water infrastructure, but storm water management and wastewater, management. Next slide, please. So how does I talked a little bit about how some of this funding work, but the money for this program is made available by servicing existing loans, collecting those loans as well as the interest of those loans, and then combining those monies with contributions from a grant from EPA. Again, each state has to match that grant 20% to grow those funds to be able to continue to release those funds for infrastructure projects. In South Carolina, and I don't know if this is true for other states, but in South Carolina, I know that there's an incentive for incorporating green infrastructure, low impact development types of elements into infrastructure projects. So if there is an eligible project that can incorporate those types of elements into their project, they have a lower interest rate that they pay back. So that is to incentivize more green infrastructure improvements as we're thinking about stormwater management, water infrastructure improvements. And then each state process follows, that process is different across each state. Next slide, please. So what type of projects are funded? Many states, all the states really, have a wide flexibility in what programs are eligible for the funds. And what I've been able to find that most of them, definitely wastewater facilities, improvements to those wastewater facilities, non-point sources of pollution, which is a huge concern in communities, particularly for industrial operations that operate along our streams and our rivers and those types of things. So being able to address those non-point sources of pollution. Also, being able to decentralize wastewater treatment systems. Green infrastructure projects, protecting our estuaries and our most essential habitats. Those projects can be used for that. And also water quality projects, being able to improve these water quality projects. I can tell you that here in Charleston, we are looking at this fund to protect a community from storm surge because they are along a estuary. And we're looking, and the city of Charleston wants to build this seawall. And they're looking at non-structural elements to protect the community from storm surge. So we're looking at this fund to look at how we can protect the estuary using using some green infrastructure systems, or maybe even some low development impact engineering techniques that could be used to protect the community. Not only from storm surge, but also from stormwater management, and also just the aesthetics of the area, seeing if we can infuse some of these funds into that project. Next slide, please. So EPA has this really cool tool called the Financing Alternative Comparison Tool, FACT for short. And what this tool is, it allows any organization or agency that is looking at accessing these types of funds, it allows them to look at a host of different types of financing mechanisms, strategies, and other tools that could be leveraged with the state revolving funds, and really trying to increase the impact of and leverage the use of the state financing funds. So I created a link here, but you can go to the EPA website and Google their financing alternative comparison tool, and this tool will pull up with to really help to compare different financing options that could be used for a particular project. Next slide, please. This right here is just a overview, and I'm sorry that this came out a little smaller than I intended, but this is just a impact of what has already been achieved with the state revolving funds, and this is looking at all states across our country. So far, 145.4 billion dollars in financing has been deployed for infrastructure improvements. And there has been over 42,000 loan agreements. And this is all the way through 2020. So they have not updated this for this year, but up to 2020, this is the current number. And it gives, again, it goes over briefly how the program works. And then it states here that some states allow communities, it allows municipalities, citizen groups, as well as nonprofits to apply for these funds. These are 30-year terms, and they say the interest rate here is somewhere around 1.2%. And then they list the different types of projects that could potentially be funded under this type of project. And they also say for every dollar the federal government puts into this program, a return on investment is $3.10 in infrastructure improvements in communities. And this ends my slide, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you so much, Omar. That was a fantastic presentation. And I appreciate you sharing, and I would like to continue to extend Omar's invitation. If anybody has any questions or questions or clarifications, Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you all. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you.
My initial question is, and actually I was just addressing it to the residents, is the mere fact that I had an opportunity to meet Mr. then Mayor Pete Buttigieg, which is over infrastructure on a federal level. And this emergency state of mind, that not only the state of mind, reality that we are now living in Benton Harbor. I remember once asking him if he had met our mayor when I was at My Brother's Keeper event, as they were taking on the President Obama's challenge. And he said, no, but I'd really love to. Okay, that was before this man ran for president, but he's sitting somewhere now that I'm hoping and praying that we have his ear. I know we have his ear because Black Lives Matter Jordan over in South Bend, he has close contact with. So I'm thinking we can get this thing done on a national level. The federal government has failed a lot of our communities due to the mere fact that money shouldn't have to go through so many hands. It should be one process delivered straight to the communities, and it should be to grassroots organizations, making sure that the work is getting done and will be done. Now, we intend to put some national pressure from some other organizations. And I'm thinking that, I mean, I guess just thinking about, I've heard this on the campaign trail of Joe Biden, even, that money needs to come straight to grassroots organizations instead of states and then down where it needs to be.
Yes, ma'am.
How can we make that happen?
Yes, ma'am. Brandon, do you want me to answer that? Okay. So some of the things, I mean, we are too having conversations not only at the federal level, but at the regional and state level as well, how to expedite those funds being into communities so they can work very quickly, right? And I can say that the Biden administration is attempting to do that, right? I don't know if many of you have heard about the Justice 40 initiative. The Justice 40 accelerators. Those accelerators are designed to help community-based organizations to prepare themselves for those monies when that money is approved from the federal government and it's able to be released. It is preparing organizations to be able to apply for those fundings, get those fundings, and be able to do the work that's necessary in the communities that they represent every day. So I can say that is one initiative, right? The Justice 40 initiative and those accelerators that are accompanying the Justice 40 initiative. I would even encourage community groups to start looking now and start planning, right? Don't wait until the money it's too late. When the money is out the door, it's too late. You need to start planning now, identifying community-based projects now, having conversations with federal agencies about what type of monies, what type of grants, what type of programs will fit, are they identifying that will fit into the Justice 40 initiative, and start planning now. We are highly encouraging groups that we work with to develop Justice 40 action plans, so that you have identified the agencies, you are starting to have those conversations. So when those grants, when those initiatives roll out, you're ready to start. If your organization is a 501c3, start applying and registering in SAMS, grants.gov. Those are arduous processes. So you don't want to wait until a RFP is released and start to register for grants. You're not going to make the deadline, because that could be a 3-4 week process, approval process. So start now, registering for grants.gov, registering for SAMS, getting your DUNS number, all the things that you need to get into that federal system. Do that now, so that when those funds are released, your organization is ready to begin that process. Third, I will highly suggest groups to work collaboratively. Do not try to attempt, particularly if this is your first round with federal funding, do not attempt to do this alone. Work in collaboratively, work with networks, get together, collaborate, use your resources, and collaborate together on these types of projects.
What an answer. Omar, so only because of the interest of time, Omar, if you could please let people know how they can get a hold of you if they have more questions.
I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And with that, I hope everybody was able to get a good grasp on the state revolving fund, from a community perspective, and how community can take advantage of those funds to make sure they are more directed to your needs instead of what the government or decisions without the community. So with that, I would like to roll into the breakout sessions. And just to give a little explanation of what the breakout sessions are going to entail, we're going to actually break out into different states. So we can take the information we've gotten from an overall review of the SRF and then apply it to our own home or our own home state. And then we can learn how we can take advantage from in that community. So Jill, do you have any additional comments?
Yes, thank you, Brandon. Just a huge thanks first to Omar. I mean, that was right on. So nice to have that overview. So thank you, and thank you for bringing that community perspective. And as Brandon was saying, now we're going to have representatives from states. We couldn't do all the states this time. So just a note that if you're not from Ohio, Wisconsin, or Michigan, we've had to clump a few states together. So don't be surprised, but we do have speakers from each of those 3 states who will be addressing specifically how the programs work in each of those states. And I'm sure that some of that will apply to those who are not from that state as well. So we're going to do an hour breakout, and then we will come back and kind of do a debrief before we get into our planning session. So I know, Alana, do you want to talk about how we'll get there?
Yeah, I'll just put you guys out into breakout rooms, and you should get a notification that you can join it. And then just hit join and you'll be in there. 1 second.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, you should get a notification now.
And everybody should just hit join. And if we could introduce the Wisconsin representative.
Hello, my name's Kay.
Hi, Kay. We're so glad to have you on. And if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Sure. So I've worked for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources in the Bureau of Community Financial Assistance in the environmental loan section for about 7.5 years. I have a degree in graphic design, so it's been challenging learning about the water and wastewater industries and about financing. I'm still learning. What I do, I'm the outreach coordinator for Wisconsin's Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds to raise program awareness and interact with potential and current program users. I get and staff booths at various local government and water and wastewater industry conferences. I do about 9 of those a year. They're a lot of fun. I also manage our e-bulletin, our electronic newsletter, and that alerts our readership of upcoming program deadlines, highlights program changes, state and federal regulation changes. It also explains topics that need clarification. I manage our web pages. So I post guidance documents. I update information, hopefully in a timely manner. What else? I develop reader-friendly publications, guidance publications to help program users understand and navigate the loan process.
Well, that's great, Kay. We so appreciate you being here. And so for our participants from Wisconsin, it sounds like you could be a wealth of information, both for questions they might have now and potentially after the fact.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. And our Ohio representative is John Bernstein. John, if you wouldn't mind a little introduction.
Sure. Morning, everybody. John Bernstein. I work with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. I've been with the agency for about 14 years, my entire professional career to date. So I started off as a permit writer and inspector for animal agriculture and the NPDES program. For the last 8 years, I've worked in our SRF program, started off as a project engineer, worked to manage our financial section, and currently administering both programs. So overseeing all of the staff. We've got about 35 staff in Columbus, Ohio, maintaining the drinking water and wastewater SRF programs. So like Kelly, going on about 3 years now over the programs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you too for being here, John. We appreciate it. And so I think we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question. And that's just a basic question for all 3 states. I'm from Michigan, although right now I'm living in New York. And one of the questions that came up during our first presenter this morning was, in each of your states, are the funds through SRF available only to municipalities or water systems, or are there some places where SRF funds are also able to go to local community organizations? And maybe, John, I'll start with you. We'll go in reverse order.
Sure. Yeah. By and large, they are going to like local governments. So on the drinking water side, we've got state rules that pretty well align with the federal law, and by and large, they're going to community public water systems. That's our typical borrower for the drinking water SRF. On the wastewater side, it is mostly governmental entities, so people with the authority to own, operate, and maintain publicly owned treatment works. We do have some programs that we work with folks like the Nature Conservancy with our Water Resource Restoration Sponsor Program. That's kind of one mechanism we use to help fund wetland preservation and restoration with a kind of unique mechanism where we have interest from loans that go to support projects, but that's about as far as we typically go. We generally don't work with private borrowers or community organizations.
Really helpful. Thank you, John. Next, we'll go to Kay. Could you answer that for Wisconsin?
My answer is pretty similar.
Okay.
As far as I know, we do not provide funding to community organizations, grassroots organizations. Our money goes to Wisconsin communities, the cities, towns, villages, counties, sanitary districts, tribes, and some other qualified local units of government.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And Kelly for Michigan, please.
I would answer that very similar to the previous two answers. So we have in our state legislation a definition of a municipality, and we can only lend funds to municipalities. However, we currently are working through a pilot project right now with a local conservation organization on some of our stormwater projects, where that organization is working with the local county. So the county will come into the program on their behalf, and we're trying that out to see how that works. And if successful, we may see more projects like that in the future.
That's great to hear. Okay, so mostly all of this goes to municipalities, which we expect because they're generally running the water systems, but also there are some, it sounds like, pieces that are either being tried or are very specific to programs that might have some openings for local groups as well. I want to, if you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself, if you now have a question for any of our states, we'll move to any of your questions. Irma, I see you have a hand up. If you just introduce yourself and your question, that'd be great.
Okay. Hi, Irma Leapart with Sierra Club, and I'm going to show you who I am right here. But volume is better without video. My question is for Kelly. So I guess can you provide a little more detail on the stormwater project that you mentioned that was the pilot exception?
Sure. So right now, we're looking at a project that would basically work as a conservation easement to reduce pollutant loading in a specific watershed. So this conservation group is working with the local county, and basically what would happen is the county would come into the program and bond technically on their behalf. And then there would be an agreement that would have to be in place between the county and the conservation organization in order to work out the details on their end on how the funds would actually flow. So we're in the midst of it right now, and we haven't actually figured out when it comes to doing draw requests on the project, if the state would pay the county or if the state would be able to actually pay the conservation organization directly to reimburse those funds. So we're in the middle of the stages of working the details out at this point.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
Good question. Thank you, Irma. Other questions?
I have a question for John, and this is just bleeding over from our breakout session because we had really great conversation, but I wanted to know, since the funding kind of goes more towards municipalities, do you have any sort of advice on how maybe communities could reach out to their municipality to try to, maybe partner or how to take advantage of some of that funding or make sure that that funding is really going where it should, I guess, and kind of highlight how that application process happens. How could we get our city to be more proactive in going for that sort of funding?
Yeah, good question. Excuse me. So, one thing we do in Ohio, and I know this is emulated elsewhere throughout the country, but we've got a group called the Small Communities Environmental Infrastructure Group. And this is a group that meets monthly if needed by demand of communities. And what we do is we have all of the funders in Ohio available to meet with communities. They come in, they present their projects, and we try to give them the best advice and walk them through the different processes that different funders have. That's really resulted in a lot of good projects and funding that communities might not have known about. It's completely voluntary, and the pandemic kind of forced us to do this virtually. And we think that's actually been a lot better for some of these communities rather than having them call themselves to Columbus. You know, it could be a 2-3 hour drive for some small communities. We've been able to reach them virtually. And for the funding itself, you know, it is on an annual basis for both programs. For wastewater, you know, I mentioned in Ohio, we typically make about $35 million available as principal forgiveness through the wastewater SRF. Our communities nominate in August, and you know, we have the plan ready for the calendar year each year. And you know, I mentioned Ohio is really looking at readiness to proceed. We want to have conversations with our communities early and often, just to understand the projects and get them ready to undertake projects, especially if it's a new community. Maybe they don't have any infrastructure. It's a big endeavor to go from nothing to operating a brand new treatment plant and collection system. And likewise, on the drinking water side, we tend to make about $13 million available in principal forgiveness each year. And that's on the state fiscal year. So, you know, we solicit nominations in February. Likewise, we're trying to work with the communities to get them ready to go. And that program, you know, is from July 1 till June 30 the following year. So we're open. You know, we like to talk to our communities. We work with people like RCAP. We do have RCAP in Ohio. I failed to mention this. We do fund them through our drinking water set-asides. So on the drinking water side, your capitalization grant does have an ability to fund things like capacity development and small community assistance. So we do partner with RCAP to kind of get the word out. And I think a lot of states do that, but we've got a really good relationship with RCAP and a lot of our local planning agencies.
And just a clarification, John, could you tell us what RCAP stands for?
Sure, it's the Rural Community Assistance Program. It's a national program, and it might have a slightly different name at the national level, but that's what it is in Ohio. And it's a staff of probably 20 or 30 folks operating all around the state, and they're available for free to small communities to assist them with applying for projects, you know, project management, oversight. They do a lot of asset management assistance, GIS work. So we're partly funding them through Ohio EPA. We have drinking water set aside. They do have some services at cost for larger communities, and they receive other grant funding across the state as well.
That's great to know. Thank you. And I see we have another hand up, Monica Lewis-Patrick.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you for all the experts that have gathered around this issue of SRF funds. Can you talk a little bit about a couple of things? One is about the difference between the SRF transitioning from being grants into loans, because what we're hearing from some communities, this has created another burden for them, especially as their tax bases are dwindling or shifting. And then the second piece is that with the SRF funds, is there any ability to use those dollars to build out community capacity, not only just around the technical assistance and the grant pursuit, but around some of the other workforce development needs in order to maintain water quality and actually facilitate the management of water?
And in case Kelly doesn't know, Monica is from Michigan. So if you could address that one.
Sure, I'll take that. Hi, Monica. I think when you're referring to grants going to loans, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might be speaking about the construction grants, which originated the loan program. Is that correct?
Wait, yes, Kelly.
Okay, so when the SRF programs first started, essentially, they came out of the construction grants program, which they were grants coming from the federal government going to the communities through the states. And then that program evolved into the state revolving loan fund. And I believe the idea at that point was to give the states a little bit more control over the programs, and that these construction grants programs would now evolve into low interest loan programs to give a funding source for money to revolve back into the state so that the fund can operate in perpetuity forever, essentially. Then, you know, that was roughly 30-ish years ago. then we've also added, or EPA has also added, the idea of principal forgiveness now in the past 10 or so years, which operates similar to a grant program, although it's not a grant, it's technically a loan forgiveness, to try and help alleviate, I believe, some of those differences going from the construction grants to the loan. And you're absolutely right. There's a huge difference between funding and financing, right? Especially at the community level. When you finance a project, when you get a loan, you still have to pay back that work. You're paying it back either at 0% interest or you're paying it back at an interest rate. So you're gonna have to come up with some type of revenue source to pay that debt back, whether that's from user fees or from the local community's general fund. You're gonna have to pay that back. So that has been challenging, and that has been a hardship for some of these communities that we may consider to be disadvantaged communities. And that rolls into the second part of your question with technical assistance. There is a mechanism in place where we can take some of the capitalization grant money out of the drinking water program. They're called set-asides, and we can use that towards technical assistance. The problem, at least here in Michigan too, that we run into is at the same time the government is changing from a grants program to a loan program, they also alleviated or eliminated some of the funding that they were providing to the states to operate the drinking water programs within the State Department. So for instance, here in Michigan, we draw 31%, which is the maximum amount we can take from our set-asides, and give that to the drinking water folks to do their job, as well as to administer some of those technical assistance type programs, either through grants or through hiring more folks in the drinking water program to go out and assist local communities. And then also keeping in mind, if we're drawing 31% from that CAP grant and giving it to those programs, that's 31% that's not going into the revolving loan program to then give out to communities that are making these capital improvement projects on their infrastructure. Hopefully I explained that okay. If you've got more questions, please let me know.
No, I think that was helpful, Kelly, because I think what you were able to do is bridge some of the governance, the governmental processes that have to be facilitated, but then also where the gaps are, and that there has been a historical divestment at the federal level that also created some of these shifts that are shifting the burden to the individual ratepayer or landowner, whereas before we had a more cooperative working relationship between federal, state, and local, as well as individual ratepayers. So I just think giving that historical context is important, because now what we're seeing too is that we're not careful in our rural partners as they're struggling to get technical assistance dollars, and then in our urban communities where we are struggling to really address issues of defining disadvantaged communities in a way that levies those dollars to where it's most needed. We just don't want our states to bifurcate those issues along historical, racial, and spatial harms. And it's just important to have that context. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add, there has been a huge disinvestment from the federal level to the state level, which obviously then trickles down to the local level as well. So yeah, I agree 100% with that. I think that combined with what we're up against now, where the infrastructure that we put in the ground years ago is approaching the end of its useful life, right? So the needs are going up dramatically, exponentially, and the amount of funding that we're getting as a state from the federal level has decreased dramatically.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Monica. Those were great. I'm going to go to George in just a second. I just want to reiterate on Kelly's point that decrease in federal funding has been of astronomical impact to our communities. So in the first half of the last century, the federal government was paying upward of 70% of the costs of our water infrastructure. And now that is down somewhere around 7%. So from 70 to 7. And so that's another reason, in addition to all that aging infrastructure, that we are seeing the need to raise rates in cases, because where's that money going to come from? And that's where we really have to get communities engaged in those conversations. So George, you had your hand up for a question.
Yes, I do. Thanks very much for allowing me to do it. I'm from Ontario, on the other side of the border.
We're glad to have you, George.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Great Lakes is important to all of us. I know that. Anyways, my concern is this. You talk about federal funding decreasing, but has user pay been an issue? That's one question. And the other question I have is, when a plant is needed to be expanded, these are big expenditures. And I want to know what is the process you have in Michigan, say, or Ohio, or Wyoming, at least not Wyoming, Wisconsin.
Yep.
Yeah. What I want to know there is what drives it? Do you actually have a trigger that says you've got to start doing something?
Good, excellent questions, both excellent questions. Do any of our state representatives want to start?
Start with your second question, George, and maybe we'll get back to your first question. You can repeat that, but I think your question was, what kind of drives like a plant expansion, and maybe by growth. If a city's growing and the plant capacity just can't keep up, in either your wastewater plant or your drinking water plant. On the other side of the ledger, it can be permit driven or compliance driven. So in Ohio and across the country, we've got the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, permitting system on the wastewater side, and oftentimes that includes schedules for communities to come into compliance with maybe the nutrient limits. We definitely have a concern about nutrients going into Lake Erie, so we've had more stringent limits on things like phosphorus in the last couple of years. Those projects can be very, very expensive, and we've tried to tailor our SRF programs to the demands of borrowers out there. So we have extended terms. A $50–60 million plant expansion can be terribly expensive to ratepayers. So terms of up to 45 years, which is kind of unprecedented in the country for SRF programs. We allow some structuring repayment to allow debt to fall off, before they actually start making their repayments to the fund in earnest. So, a variety of factors kind of drive those projects, but ultimately it's going to be up to the municipalities to implement the projects. And we try to be available with, the best deal we can through the SRF, whether it's, low interest loans or potentially principal forgiveness. And could you repeat the first part of your question, George?
Well, user pay.
Yeah. So
you don't need any of that if you got user pay.
Yeah. No,
you got somebody planning. And my issue is this: we have an experience here where what's happening is they did not expand the plant. 5 years out, it takes a while to get them even figured, designed and so forth. So they're in a mess right now. The developers are all over them as the plant isn't available and they have to curtail development. So I thought you would have something that at 5 years, if the flows exceed the design capacity of the plant, or 80% of the plant, then you'd require the municipality to make a decision to carry out an expansion and to start planning for it. And somewhere along the line, you've got to be in a position when that 80% is design capacity is reached, you've got a plant in place. And I was almost positive Ohio had something like that.
Yeah, well, as far as user rates go, affordability is something that's really being discussed, at the state and federal level. We've been collecting sewer and water rates for probably 30 years. This is a voluntary submittal from our municipalities, and what we've seen is rates have been increasing over those 30 years. That's no surprise to anybody. They tend to increase even faster than inflation. So we've only got so many tools in the tool belt of the SRF. Certainly we can offer lower interest loans, but those loans do need to be repaid. So it's kind of a balancing act for us. We've got limited principal forgiveness to offer. We've got the lowest funds we can offer through the SRF. At the same time, we need to underwrite those loans to make sure, our municipalities can repay them. So it's challenging, and as Kelly kind of alluded to, it'd be nice if there was more grant funding out there, for the programs, because loans are great, but they do need to be repaid, and principal forgiveness is fairly limited.
Thank you so much, John. Did either Ohio or Michigan want to add anything?
So this is Kelly in Michigan. I can add one of the dilemmas that we are seeing here in Michigan as far as user rates and affordability and stuff goes. Michigan does not have any type of a public body that reviews rates or has to do with rate setting. So all of that is set and done at the local level. What I think happens is that becomes a political discussion. So you have locals who are running for political office in their political bodies, and they don't want to raise rates, and they haven't raised rates for years. So now when they need to make improvements on their system, their rate structure may not have been adequate over the past 10 years to raise enough rates to now make major improvements to their system. So you're either seeing this huge, quadrupling of a rate structure, or they're just not making the improvements because they don't have the resources there. So, and George, this kind of speaks a little bit to what we were copying in Canada. Canada was very, they're on the forefront of asset management. And here in Michigan, probably over the past 5 years, we've been trying to push asset management. It's something that is in permits now. It's something that we've provided a lot of grant funds for, in hopes that a community will look at their system holistically. They'll look at the needs, down the road in 5, 10, 15 years. They'll look at the operation and maintenance needs, and they'll create a rate structure that they can sustain the infrastructure that they need. Ideally, if they're creating this robust asset management system and they're able to increase rates, not so dramatically over time, but just small increments over time, they wouldn't even need the revolving loan program, because they'd be able to fund some of these large scale improvements on their own as well. But we got so far behind the game for so many years. Now we're trying to play catch up, especially with the rate structure as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And Kay, from a Wisconsin perspective, could you give us some insight also?
What Kelly and John said echoes in Wisconsin. I think that our funding in Wisconsin is really good. We have really low interest rates for municipalities who don't meet our financial need criteria. They can still get a 20-year loan for an interest rate below 1.5%. They may also be eligible for principal forgiveness on top of that. I don't know. I think that's really great. Part of our application process is a credit affordability review, and that determines whether or not the municipality has the financial capacity to pay back the loan. Sometimes it is basically required that the municipality needs to increase the user rates to get the loan, so they have more funds to pay back the loan. We have the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. They set the drinking water user rates, And they're very fair and equitable. I believe the wastewater user rates are set by the local government. Yeah. Is that
Okay.
any help?
Yeah,
oh,
that's
yeah,
really
that is
helpful.
helpful. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Kate, and thanks to all of you. We're going to take a couple of more questions, I think. And one thing I just want to add in to the good answers that we've heard is that on the other side of the coin, on the other side of this idea of how do you grow when you need more capacity, I just want to bring up the issue that often happens in some of our cities that are not growing and in fact are shrinking. And so when you're losing industry, when you're losing workers that are leaving your state, you can really have too much capacity. And so, that is an issue that also drives unaffordability because you have fewer ratepayers now. So it's not that you're necessarily having to expand your plants, but you are having to maintain a very large infrastructure that is a smaller percentage of which is now being used. And you have a smaller number of ratepayers. So that really can drive unaffordable prices as well. So all of those issues, they're really complicated, and that's really why it's so important for community members to be engaged with their municipality in these processes so that that city is thinking about their residents and what are the particular issues in that space. So with that, I'm going to take another question from Irma, and then we'll go to Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Jill. My comment was basically along the lines of what you just said. And for me, I live in Detroit. I'm working in Detroit, so my interests are specifically Detroit focused. Mm-hmm. And so, and this is, Kelly, to your comment, it makes perfect sense what you said. Save for a rainy day. Save for when you need it. But when you're in a community that's losing population, that has a poverty level, largely due to systemic racism, to practices, redlining, subprime mortgages, et cetera, things that have been done kind of deliberately to disenfranchise a community, that, I think there has to be some different thinking. And maybe that's why we've got the disadvantaged community definition. And I'm sure Detroit would fall within that definition. But I just think there has to be some different thinking in terms of when you see population shifting and et cetera, that all that has to be taken into consideration. And I'd like to suggest that maybe at some point there be some kind of symposium or something around this relating to Southeast Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you, Irma. Yeah, that's a great point. And I should let everyone on this call know that the steering committee for this group, for All About Water, actually has a working definition of disadvantaged community because we're concerned that it's being defined differently in all the different states and municipalities and federal programs. And so we'll make sure to share that with everybody on this call after the call so that you can see that and even weigh in if you have some thoughts about how to improve it, because we'd like that to be a working good definition that helps. With that, Mary Alice, Commissioner, would you ask your question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jill. And you answered quite a bit, and so did John, with the commonalities that we have being in different states. And I want to thank Kelly for some of the things that she was able to answer as well. But my question is to Kelly, and I think you were given light on who sets the tone or the who sets the grants and everything up that needs to be distributed to different communities or those that apply, whoever puts those together. My question is, does something need to happen legislatively for these water rates and things like that? And I asked that question because I happen to be on the state of Michigan's legislative committee, and nothing like this has ever come up. And I'm now wondering why, because it's very important and it's something legislatively that sounds like needs to happen. Am I on the right trail?
Yeah. So this is an interesting idea, and I agree with everything that's been said. And we're going now from a discussion, and I mean, we're going now internally within Eagle right now within my section, even specifically with SRF. We're going from a discussion of disadvantaged communities, moving it towards a discussion towards affordability. And those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. The disadvantaged legislation that is in place for determining if a community is disadvantaged or not within the SRF program, it's written in state statute for Michigan. It was drafted nearly 20 years ago. We're currently in the process of reviewing that statute because it doesn't fit today's needs. And it doesn't fit what the discussions around affordability are. Just because a community is disadvantaged and they may get a 20% principal forgiveness on their SRF loan, that doesn't mean that those pockets within that community that can't afford water can now suddenly afford water, right? So internally about what does this mean for SRF? What does this mean at a state level? Do we need to have an affordability definition across Eagle, across the department? Do we need to have an affordability definition within SRF? So those are the decisions that are taking place right now, or I'm sorry, those are the discussions that are taking place right now, because there is a difference between disadvantage and affordability.
Yes, thank you. And it seems like they both can exist in the same space. Yeah.
Yes, they both can exist in the same space. What mechanisms do we have in place to address both of those issues, I think is the question as well. Is SRF the mechanism to address affordability at a local level? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know how SRF addresses affordability at a local level, meaning that particular person that can't afford their water, right? What's the solution there? That's the question I think that we need to help answer.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for that, Kelly. That was really helpful. And I know Brandon is, oh, sorry, Monica, go ahead.
Just on that particular point, can Kelly talk about, is there room in your discussion to make sure there's some metrics of accountability from those particular water systems that actually are benefiting from those state revolving funds, so that if affordability or disadvantage is the language that's going to be used, there's at least some mandatory reporting around shutoffs, restorations, and the demographics of those communities?
Yeah, and we've been having that. In fact, just this week, I had that conversation. If we change the language legislatively on what disadvantaged is, what are those metrics, and how do we make sure that the forgiveness that we're giving a community is being used in a way that it's benefiting those folks who can't afford the water? So I think there is some room there. I just don't know yet what it might look like.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Monica, for that question. It's so important right now that we really make sure that we have accountability for how those dollars are being used to maintain that affordability. I see Brandon coming back on, and I know he's going to want to move us to our next session soon. So to close this session, I just wanted to take another minute from each of our guests and ask what resources are available in your state to help, especially with communities who may not have had or accessed SRF funds before. So for those new municipalities, how could their community members who might be on this call today direct them to some assistance from your state to help them access the funds? And I'll just ask Kay if you would start this one.
I think our program coordinators are a great resource. We provide their contact information on our website, and in our guidance documents and web pages, we direct users to them. And they know the most about the programs. Also, the engineering firms in Wisconsin, they're very, they use, one of their marketing tools is that they sell funding, finding funding sources and grant writing and that kind of thing is a service that they provide. So a lot of times our engineering consultants, they fill out the applications and the ITAs and perps for the municipality.
That's really helpful. That's a good thing to share. Okay, we really appreciate that. We see that in a lot of fields, and I hadn't really thought about it in terms of SRF. So thank you. But then the other thing that Kay said in Wisconsin is those program, did you call them coordinators? Program coordinators?
Yes. It would be the Clean Water Fund program coordinator for wastewater and stormwater projects, and the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program coordinator for drinking water projects.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And we'll ask Kelly, could you address that same question about where people in Michigan could direct their municipality to find assistance?
Sure. So I will echo those sentiments that the consulting firms, the engineering firms do a lot of marketing for us as well. SRF staff, we've put SRF staff in all of our district offices around the state. So, or nearly all of them. All of the local district offices should have an SRF person there that's familiar with the program, knows how it works, and is going to be working one-on-one with those local communities on program details. There's also a posting currently right now for the Michigan Municipal League where they are hiring a grant writer. So what this person is going to be doing is working closely with Eagle. A community or community member can reach out to this grant writer, tell them what their needs are, and they can basically direct them into which department or which funding source might be available to them.
Wow, that's great to hear. I didn't know about that. Is there someplace on a website that people could find more information about that one?
That one, because they're currently hiring for it, I'm not sure if there's anything on the website yet.
Okay.
But you could probably check Michigan Municipal League. I haven't looked myself to see if it's up there. You can always go to Michigan's Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF websites, which is michigan.gov/CWSRF or /DWSRF for information about our programs as well.
Very helpful. Excellent. Thank you very much, Kelly. And over to you, John, in Ohio.
Yeah, I did mention two of the groups that do a lot of outreach for us. The Small Communities Environmental Infrastructure Group is a great forum for small communities to meet the funders, not just us, but all of our partners across the state. The Rural Community Assistance Program, RCAP, they're fantastic. Free services for all sorts of communities of all different sizes. in our staff, and we've got about 35 staff out of Columbus. Pre-COVID, we were always happy to go out and, meet the different communities and tell them about our program. They would meet with our financial staff or engineering staff and the environmental staff and, try to help them plan out and, map out their projects. There's also a number of different planning agencies across the state, kind of on a regional basis, very, very useful resources. And, we think we do a lot of good outreach. We do a lot of webinars at Ohio EPA just to make people aware of our services and what's out there. I did see a question come in, Irma, about SRF funds being used for septic systems. You're right, they can't be used typically for like a loan or a grant directly to a resident, but in Ohio, making principal forgiveness award in earnest for about 5 years. We fund local health districts to assist low-income homeowners in repairing and replacing their septic systems. So in the last about 5 years, we've made, I think, $60 million available and probably close to 3,000 systems repaired. And those are all, low-income homeowners across the state.
That's great to hear. Yeah, thank you, John. Good to know. So I just want to thank all of our speakers and thanks for all the information you brought us today and for being flexible to switch kind of format as we figured out how this would work today. We really appreciate all the information you provided. And I just want to add, if there's anything you would be willing to share in terms of a particular website, any notes about your presentation today or anything like that that we could share with participants, if you could just send that to Alana at freshwaterfuture.org, we will make sure that it gets to all the participants so that they have your contact information or any way you think we should be in touch with your state. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back to Brandon.
Disappeared. No. Thank you so much. Again, I would like to reiterate Jill's thanks. The information was really incredible. I think it created a great understanding, at least for myself, and I hope even more understanding for the community. Great links and websites to attend. Make sure everybody gets a chance to follow up on those links and be able to use those for your personal times. But right now, we would like to begin a transition from this breakout session or breakout Q&A, however you like to state it, into a presentation from Jill. And Jill, if you wouldn't mind, I would love if you would just talk about what that presentation will look like.
Thank you, Brandon. And hopefully you're not all tired of my voice at this point, but I will make mine brief because I really want to make sure we have enough time at the end for Monica Lewis-Patrick, who is going to share what she sees as some highlights of our conversations today. And then she will help us close out with any questions and things that you may have. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Alana if she could bring up my slide deck, please. Thank you. And so what we wanted to, now that we've heard from the 3 state agencies, we've heard more about the SRF funds in general, what they are, how they get allocated, what you can do. We really wanted to just spend a few minutes getting down to, so what would it look like in your community if you want to make sure your municipality is accessing some of these funds? And in particular, if you're in a community that is struggling with high water rates and unaffordability and water shutoffs for residents, can you work with your municipality to try and figure out how loan forgiveness and these sorts of programs could help to ensure that rates don't continue to rise as things are upgraded, as plants are upgraded, sewer lines are upgraded, water lines are removed that are lead, all those things that do add costs. And so how do we better manage that so it's not all on the bills of individual residents. So that's my goal with this quick presentation. Just so you all know, we will have a handout that basically will have all of this information in it, and you'll receive that in an email after the call. So don't worry about trying to take notes on all of this. Next slide. So we're just going to go through what we would call a campaign plan. And so I'm hoping this might be of use to you in two ways. One is we're going to go through just an example of how we think a community can help to influence how their municipality looks at SRF funding and hopefully goes out and gets some and then works with the community to make sure it's meeting community needs. And the second way is campaign plans can be useful for any issue. And so we hope that this kind of outline that I'm going to present might be useful as you think about any other issue you're having and you're working on in your community. Next slide, please. All right, so I've made up a scenario for us so that we can talk through this example. A city has rising water rates, that's certainly common. And it means people are having trouble affording their bills. The federal funding that's going to be coming through state revolving funds is available to municipal water systems. And so some of that will be forgivable. And so how could a municipality focus on that to make sure that a need in the community is taken care of without raising rates on those that really can't afford higher rates? In this case, we're going to talk about lead line replacements because that's such a prominent issue across the country and certainly here in the region, and how we can help that city to get this project done. So that's our situation. Next slide, please. So a goal might then be replacing lead service lines in the most economically challenged neighborhoods within the city, but at no cost to residents by utilizing SRF funding. And it sounded like it might not be SRF, but other funds in Ohio, as an example, to remove lead lines without raising rates on those who can't afford higher rates. So that's our goal. Next slide. So who might our decision makers be? It's important to have a goal for any of our campaign work. And it's also really important to do this kind of, sometimes you'll hear it called a power analysis. Who has the power to make the decision? And in this case, that might be the water utility director that will be deciding whether a grant is applied for. It could be the mayor's office that directs something to happen. And if they're not amenable to this goal that we have, you could also work with city council because they can be an important decision maker in these kinds of things as well. So think through who are those decision makers who can actually get things done. Next slide, please. Then one thing we sometimes forget is who are the best messengers for those particular decision makers. So when we want to reach, say, a governor, we may not have a direct connection with that governor, but we might know people who do have a great and direct connection with the governor. And so it's thinking about who do we know or who can we create a relationship with that our decision maker holds in esteem or listens to for these kinds of things. So we want to identify, again, those messengers. And, you know, in a case like this, that might be an engineering firm. It might be a trusted advisor of the mayor. It might be a prior water director for the city. So there could be lots of messengers. And it's also important to make sure that our decision makers understand that whatever project they undertake will have an impact on the residents. And so encouraging them to find ways to make residents messengers by holding town halls and other kinds of public input processes. So that's messengers. Next slide. And then, of course, we have to decide what messages will impact that particular decision maker. So you might have different messages on the same campaign, but going to different people. For instance, if your mayor is really focused on bringing in new business to the community, they might not want to have a lot of messages out in town about how people don't have water to drink right now. So one way to approach that mayor might be to say, we need to prevent people's water from being cut off. And how are we going to use this project to do that? So defining those messages by the particular decision maker will be important. Next slide, please. So once we have all of that, we know our goal, we know what we want to accomplish, we know who can make the decisions, we know at least some of the messages that we think will work and who can carry those messages for us. Then we get down to what are the methods that we're going to use to get that done. One important piece is always doing some research, looking at what's the city already doing. Are they already applying for SRF funds? Do they have other plans? And how can that fit in or not fit in with what the community wants? Has the city successfully received funds like this in the past? And if not, can we do something to connect them to the people in the state that could provide some assistance? And is there a grant writer or other capacity within the city or the water utility to make this happen? And as we heard from Callie a little bit ago, you know, it sounds like the municipal league, at least in Michigan, might be able to help with some of that capacity as these federal funds are coming in. So really looking at what are the possibilities for your city. Next slide, please. Meetings. So based on what we learn in our research, we probably want to reach out to the mayor's office, find out what the mayor has planned, if anything, and explain our campaign goals and see what their interests might be in that, and then develop next steps from there. Also, reaching out to the water utility director to have a similar conversation about interest and what they already have in the works. And then other meetings might become important, such as if you find that there is interest, you might be able to go right to the grant writer for the city and sit down and talk about this goal you have and what your thoughts are and how the community would be supported with such a project. And also talk to other communities with successful SRF projects and programs, and try to learn as much as possible that could be brought in to the city to help this happen. Next slide, please. So other methods would include, how can you bring in additional assistance? We heard some things today, talking to engineering firms. If that's one of the things that they provide, see if you can get some of them on board, talking to your city or your municipal water authority. Request that the city host town hall meetings or other styles of meetings, not only to explain the project, but also to hear what residents are saying and make sure that the way it will be implemented is supported with residents. You can also continue to work with the city and residents to ensure that throughout the process, not just in securing funds, but as the engineering plan goes into implementation and things are dug up and homes are impacted, that the residents remain at the top of everyone's agenda. And then engagement and outreach. really listening to resident needs sometimes becomes sort of an afterthought or something that a municipality may do right before they go into implementation because they're required to. But we really want to do that at the beginning. And so help the city think through, how do you get resident engagement on these processes? And how do you reach out and do that engagement in ways that ensure not only the project will be helpful to residents, but that it will be done in a way that the residents really feel ownership and appreciate that project. Next slide, please. Then you can think through allies. We've done that a little bit with our state representatives today, but thinking about, you have local associations like neighborhood associations, block clubs, other local groups that are active on a community level might be really interested in bringing in resident opinions and also doing outreach. So reaching out to all of those as allies. Local environmental and water groups, bringing them in as allies, using their expertise to really make things succeed. If there are state, regional, and national groups that can lend some expertise that you think your city or your group might need, bring them in as an ally. And of course, trying to work with our elected officials as allies first, because if everybody's on the same page, you can move things forward more quickly. In some cases, they will have other ideas, and so they may not be seen as allies initially, and just find additional ways to work with them in that case. Next slide, please. What other tools can you use in a process like this? You'll find that there are other resources out there like messaging research. There are message research pieces on stormwater and other water issues that exist outside of your city. For example, Healing Our Waters Coalition does a lot of water messaging work. And so you might be able to use some of those tools to help you create the best messages for your cause. The city will also have a lot of data around what water rates are, how many people are being shut off. Now, they might not want to share that. In some towns they don't, in some they do. But getting that information, as well as about flooding and stormwater fees, all of those things can help add. And then you can also collect, or you may already have, some of your own data. The two pictures in the top of this slide are actually from Freshwater Future's Stormwater app. So we do have a phone app that you could use to collect information during storm events. You get your residents to basically notice that, geez, my basement is flooded. I'm going to take a picture of this. It automatically gets geocoded and then can be mapped in terms of, here's the issue with flooding that was happening on this street during this flooding event. So, those sorts of tools are out there. They're not always easy to find. That's why I mentioned ours. We're happy to share it if you have a need for something like that. But often these kinds of tools are out there in other larger groups. And so if you need something like that, reach out to Sierra Club. I know we have Sierra Club on the call, to the Ohio Environmental Council, the Michigan Environmental Council. In all of our states, there are lots of groups like this that may have data or tools that could be helpful to you. Next slide, please. All right, so I promised I would keep it brief, and I hope I have. But that's one way you can just use a structure of a campaign plan to think through, what is it going to take to get our municipality to take advantage of these federal funds that are going to be coming down soon. So we will send this out in written format for you so you can utilize it if you find it helpful. I think we probably have time for one or two clarifying questions or questions about this process before we move on to our wrap up, if anyone has any. All right, hearing no questions, I'm going to turn it back to you, Brandon. Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Jill, thank you for the presentation. There's been a lot of great information that we have cultivated during this presentation, and I know it's a lot for us to be able to soak in, and Monica is going to later give us a great overview of what we've covered. But before we get into that closing period, we're going to open up for polling, and it's only 2 polls that we're going to be asking. But to kick off for the first one, as it comes up, the question is, what was your knowledge before on this topic? And if you could provide a 1 through 10 answer, 1 being the least amount that you've gotten out of it, 10 being the most amount.
Brandon, it seems like it's a question in the chat for Jill.
Oh, yes. While people answer those poll questions, maybe I can just address that. Are there recommended frameworks for power analysis? Yes and no. I don't know of any formal processes, but I do know that I've been through quite a few of them. I know Monica has as well. And that's something that we can certainly we help with through our consulting, but we can also just provide you with the process we go through. I don't know that it has a particular name, but we will send that out with the materials, a link to our method for doing power analysis. So thank you for that question, Anthea.
Yeah, and it seems from the polling, there were people around halfway mark. You know, they knew about half of what was going on. So we're going to move on to the next polling question, and that is, what is your knowledge after this topic? So after we've discussed everything from a scale of 1 to 10, 1, you learned nothing after the presentation, 10 being it totally restructured your world. Okay. Yep, and it looks like there was a bit of an improvement for the most part, which is fantastic. And you know, this is just for us to be able to view, you know, our value to you, because we really appreciate the work that everybody is doing, the time that people take out. And with that, we like to bring people together, brilliant minds, experts in the space and different sides of the same space, and be able to broaden our horizon together. But without further ado, I would like to bring on Monica Lewis-Patrick. She is the founder and executive director of We the People of Detroit. And Monica, if you could give us a closing overview of what we've discussed from your point of view.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Brandon. We know you most endearingly as Silky Smooth. It has been just a pleasure to be here today with All About Water and all of the amazing minds from the grassroots to the leadership that's happening with water systems management. But as we talked about state revolving funds today, just appreciate John, Kelly, and Kate for all that they brought, the transparency, the willingness to answer hard questions. But the things they lifted up about permits versus compliance, how to access the funding, being very intentional about partnerships and collaborations, making sure that community has the capacity to capture those dollars, and then talking about some of the programs that they're moving forward in their respective states of Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan. A need to ensure equitable processes. These are the things we heard from community. Partnerships. We heard often that it is important to have those friends before we need them. And so we need to make sure that we're building relationships as we're building this deeper understanding of state revolving funds and how to access them. Affordability definition is being advanced in Michigan. Also conversations about defining disadvantaged communities. We are so grateful that All About Water and this collaboration has already defined disadvantaged communities, and we're moving our own community lifted definition of that. But it is good to know too what is being moved at the state levels. Finance versus funding, that's important to know. We know that we need both. We need funding and we need financing. And so being able to educate our communities, not only urban and suburban, but rural, in terms of the fundings that is available, but also advocating collectively as members of state formations and regional formations to make sure technical assistance gets to those communities, not just urban, but rural as well. Talking about information gaps in terms of where the levers of government are, and then where are the places where community can be more compelling in lifting their voices and having their input. There's a need for more safe spaces to increase community knowledge about water funding, finance, technical assistance. And then also the need to create metrics, not only at the municipal levels and within these water systems, but we also must create them at the community levels to create accountability, to also be able to inform our own research and those that we're collaborating with, and to create community oversight so that there is more transparency in that accountability. And so, Brandon, I just appreciate all that has happened today. It's been, as you stated, extremely informative. Once again, All About Water is a place where you can get informed, get inspired, and then hopefully what we'll do is we'll take action.
Absolutely, Monica. And actually, could you bring up a little bit about a day without water?
Thank you so much for that reminder. Tomorrow is National Imagine a Day Without Water. And we are so proud of all the speakers and the groups that are showing up. Definitely in Michigan, we don't have to imagine, and all across this country, as 20% of Americans are challenged with the inability to afford their water and proper sanitation. And so we will be hearing from leaders like the amazing Mama Claire McClinton from Flint, who is leading a ballot initiative along with other leaders in Flint for water affordability. We will also hear from Reverend Pinckney, a great leader in Benton Harbor and a critical part of what is happening from the leadership of the Benton Harbor Water Council. And hats off and salute to Commissioner Adams, who I know is a part of that great work that's happening. But we'll hear about that update. We will also hear from Tony Spinola, who is another All About Water friend and ally, about what's happening with PFAS in the state of Michigan and at the federal level and the funding that's coming in. And then we will hear from our young folks that have worked together with the Flint Development Center, having the first youth-led water testing lab in the nation, also working with the infrastructure and blue and green dollars that are generating in Ohio under the leadership of Alicia Smith and the Toledo Junction. And then we're excited about what's happening with the Flint, with the We the People of Detroit's work that is centered in youth leadership by We the Youth of Detroit, where they are looking at water testing and collaborative measures of GIS mapping and finding out what's in their water so that they can speak from a place of knowing and be a part of this critical leadership that's being developed and nurtured here in the Great Lakes. And I know you too have been a part of those trainings, Brandon. So hats off to you and all the leadership that's been generated at Freshwater Future to help move these initiatives forward.
Yes, thank you, Monica. And in a very eloquent way, it's us working together, it's us collaborating, bringing resources from all places to be able to do the good work. So please make sure you see and check out A Day Without Water. That will be tomorrow. Monica, one more time, could you say what time that is tomorrow?
That will be 6 o'clock tomorrow. I am actually going to put the link in the chat, but it's just a great opportunity to get informed, get engaged. Everybody will have action steps that they will take away from this gathering. But in Michigan, we don't have to imagine. We know what it's like to live with toxic water, with unaffordable water, and with water extraction. So thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much. So with that, we are here to wrap it up. We are about 7 minutes early, but we're going to send out love and thank you to everybody. And that may take a couple minutes. And anybody who has any final comments, in particular, I'll be more than happy to open and share as we say our goodbyes. Jill, would you like to kick it off?
Well, thanks, Brandon. I just want to thank all the participants and the speakers for the great job. Thank you to Freshwater Future staff for being there and flexible today. And thanks especially to Monica Lewis-Patrick for bringing us those great wrap-up words and her thoughts about tomorrow, which is such an important day because we have to keep the heat on this idea that we should not have people without water, without access to water. So we want to really lift it. And just thanks to participants for your time. And next month, we'll also have another one of these because we can't be in person. We're going to stretch them out a little bit. So look for information on that. And then also look for an email probably tomorrow where we will give you all of the speaker information and presentation notes and things from today. So just again, a great thank you. It was a great session and wonderful to reconnect with so many of you.
Absolutely. And one more thing before we let everybody go, that there's a reminder that if you haven't gotten a chance to register for the next session that we have for All About Water is November 17th, same time, 9:30 to noon. We can most certainly send you a link in the chat to make sure that everybody has access to that. But other than that, I really would just wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you all for your participation. The link is in the chat, and have a good day.
Thank you all so much. Please stay safe.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Please
Commissioner.
stay safe. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.